Hey everyone, my name is Matt. Welcome to my shop, and welcome to episode 12 of my Ask Matt series, where I talk about things that just about you, the viewer. Now today, this is a very common request for me, is to go over my finishing process and techniques. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So the most important part about finishing is the pre-finishing. Or maybe not the most important, but it's probably as important to have a really great finish prep regimen before you actually get to the finishing stages, which we'll get into. So my finish prep typically goes something like this. If it is a flat panel that is pretty much straight grain and does not have any of this crotch figure in it, that's going to be really simple. That's just going to be the random orbit sander. I'll typically start at 120 grit unless the surface needs a little more leveling or there's a lot more tear out or something I need to remove. Then I'll drop down to 80 grit to start with, but otherwise 120, 150, and then 180, and I stop at 180. Now, depending on how the surface looks after the 180 grit, I might come back with a sanding block and hand sand with 220 just to get rid of any fuzzies or anything that doesn't look, to make it more uniform looking. And I'll especially do that on anything that has a lot more figure in it here, like this one. So for instance, on here, I sanded this thing with 120, 150, 180, and then I hand sanded with 220. And before that, I actually had a few areas of tear out that I took out with a little bit of card scraping action, just to get rid of any little bit of tear out and clean up that surface a little more. Now, depending on the species and the look I'm going for, at this point, if it doesn't look very clean, I'll actually go over the entire surface with the card scraper and get a nice scraped look to it. And that's going to be really more common for me on things with a lot of figure in them, like in this case with this crotch figure. I was lucky this time. I didn't need to do a whole lot of prep work on this panel, but in the past it's been a lot more necessary. So once I have it all sanded and prepped and ready to go, the next thing I would do is just take a little bit of mineral spirits on a rag and just wipe off any dust that's already on the panel. Now, I did do that on this panel already. I got a little carried away with it. I dumped a whole thing of mineral spirits on it just to see what the figure looked like. So if you saw that on Instagram, that was just me dumping mineral spirits on the panel just to see what it's going to look like. Now, that step is probably the most important step between pre-finishing and finishing, because that allows you to see any defects or any issues that are in this piece before you actually apply the finish. And as I'm going, I might actually wipe some mineral spirits on there just to see where I'm at, if there's any more defects I need to get rid of, because they might not be obvious when it's looking like this, but once you get some kind of moisture on it, either if you can use a water-based finish, if you're going to wipe it down with a little water, or if you can use an oil-based finish, wipe it down with a little bit of mineral spirits or whatever the thinner you're using is going to be, that's going to make those defects very, very obvious, and you'll kind of avoid any of those surprises when you go to apply your finish and you're like, oh, I forgot to get rid of this little bit of glue or something like that. So as I'm doing my finish prep, I keep my mineral spirits nearby and I'll just wipe it down as I'm going, just to make sure I'm getting everything nice and uniform and perfect and ready for the finish. Now, my finish of choice is Armor Seal. It's a wiping varnish and I apply it with a rag. It goes on really easily and it's really hard to screw up, which is what I like. And the finish turns out really smooth and really, really nice. I really like it. It brings out the figure quite well. Now, you can make your own wiping varnish as well. I've tried that and I just don't get as good results as I do with the Armor Seal. I just don't like the color, I guess. I don't know what it is. Something in there makes the wood just pop a little better than just poly, boiled linseed oil, and mineral spirits, which is sort of a homemade recipe you can make. But let's get into the finishing. All right, so I like to use a rag to apply the finish, and I like a small pad. So I like to make my little applicator pad not too big, because I got small hands, so that's it right there. One little applicator pad. I've got my finish here. I've got it opened already. And one thing that I like to do with the finishing process is the first coat that I put on, I'll use like an old can. And I'll use whatever sheen I have that I want to get rid of. So this is a semi-gloss, and I'll actually be using a semi-gloss finish, but I've used gloss for the first coat before. It doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to get rid of it, and this is all going to get pulled into the wood quite a bit anyway. So I'm not too worried about the sheen at this point. So I'm going to get my applicator just a little moist here with some mineral spirits, and then I can go ahead and dunk my rag into the finish here, get a nice good amount on there, and then just kind of puddle it on here. Now the wood at this point is very thirsty, and this is gonna pull this stuff right in. So what I like to do is just kind of go around in a swirling pattern, just to kind of spread the finish out over the surface and allow it to soak in. Now I have this this panel or the desk lid here up on some of those painter's pyramids, and when you're doing something with two sides like this, you want to start with the side that is less important, because that side is going to get flipped over on top of that support piece, so that finish might have some defects in it from the standoffs or the tips of the pyramids in my case. So this is the inside of the desk right here. So I'm just kind of going over it, and now that I got the whole surface wet, I'll look at it and I'll see what areas are pulling finish in more, and I'll come back and just stick some more finish on those areas really quickly. So like over here in this crotch area, this is gonna be really thirsty here. This is mostly all end grain really. So that's pulling it in. You can see, I don't know if you can see it, but you can really see that just pulling stuff in, and it's dry in these areas. So I'll just put some more finish on there. Alright, now let's do around the rabbit here real quick. The nice thing about using a rag is that, at least when I'm using it, one side of the rag is usually wetter, or more wet than the other side, just because of how I dip it into the can. The front side is going to be wet, or more wet than the back. So if I put too much finish on one spot, I can come back with the back side, wipe up a little bit of that excess, and then I'm good to go. Okay, so now I'm going to get this panel prepped to be flipped. And to do that, I'm just going to go back and forth over the surface and just even things out here. Just back and forth. I'm not applying any pressure. I'm just dragging the pad over the surface. And that's just going to even things out for me. And it looks pretty good to go. So I'll just flip that panel over and put it back down. And then same exact thing on this side. Alright, so same thing as before. I'm just going to come back and forth, just lightly dragging that rag over the surface. And you can see I'm actually rocking my body, because that makes it a lot easier to make sure you're not applying any pressure. So I'm just rocking back and forth. Do down here real quick. Alright, now here's a very important step. The last thing I do is on panels, I'll go around the corners here, around the edges, and just kind of at an angle, just pull off any excess that might be hanging down there. So if there was any pooling or dripping that went down the sides, this will catch that, and you won't have like a big glob on that corner or on that edge on the other side, which is kind of annoying and it's hard to get rid of. So that's the first coat, and I'll let this dry. Probably about 4 hours or so. It's just a little after 2 right now. And I'll let this dry, and I'll come back and apply a second coat in a little bit. Alright, we're back. It is 9 o'clock, same day. And we're going to go with our second coat here. First coat takes a little longer to dry because it's a little heavier, or it's going to be the heaviest coat of the entire finishing process. So this was dry probably a couple hours ago, but I was eating dinner, so I just made it out here, and we're going to put the second coat on. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and sand the surface with 600 grit sandpaper. And I already sanded this area right here, and let's see if you can hear the sound it makes. Now let's compare it to the rough area over here. So it's still rough. It's not really rough, but it does have a texture to it. So what I'm going to do is just knock that down with the sandpaper. I'm sanding really lightly. I'm not applying pressure. I'm just using maybe the weight of my hand to just smooth it out. With the edges. Okay. And then I'm going to come back with a rag with a little mineral spirits on it, just to clean up the dust. All right, I'll flip it over. Again, we want to start on the less important side. I'll do the same thing over here. All right, so now I can go ahead and apply my second coat of finish. So I'm going to make my little applicator pad thing again, a new one. I have a little bit of my leftover can here left to go, so I'm going to use that for this coat, but then the next one I'll start with my new fresh can. So kind of similar process, just kind of flooding it on here, getting it wet. Now the whole idea with this wipe-on finish is you're trying to create a very slow build, so that each coat is very gradual, so it's really nice and smooth and consistent in the end there, or when you get to the end. So this coat and every subsequent every subsequent coat is going to be very thin. So you can see I haven't dipped the rag very much, but I've wet the surface down, and now I can come back and even out the coat by, again, just lightly dragging the rag over the surface back and forth. All right, let's flip this over. And repeat the same thing on this side. There we go. That coat is done. I'll see you in a couple hours. All right, it's 11:30. It's been a few hours here, and it's time to do exactly the same thing. All right, here we go. All right. That's it for this coat. I'll see you again in a few hours. All right, I'm back out here again. It's just after 3 a.m. So it's been a few hours since the last coat. It's nice and dry. Just knock down these little bits of little bumps here, and we'll put the next coat on. There we go. All right, that's it for this coat. I'm gonna go to bed. I'll see you in the morning. All right, I'm back. It's about 11:30 in the morning, and I'm here and I'm ready to do my last coat of finish. Now this is gonna be pretty similar to everything I've done previously, but on this one here, I'm going to be a lot more meticulous with my sanding. I want to get this really as perfect and ready to go as possible, because this coat is going to be the thinnest coat, and all it's really going to do is just kind of clean up the scratch pattern from the sandpaper. So I'm just going to go over the whole panel and make sure I got it all nice, get rid of any imperfections in the surface with the little nibs in the surface from the dust floating around, and then we'll go with the finish. Now here I'm actually applying pressure, and you can see I'm getting a lot of the finish turning to dust on the sandpaper, so that's good. That's what I want. That's what I'm trying to do here. All right, that is really smooth. That's nice. All right, into the other side. Okay, now this is going to be a really light coat, so I'm not really even going to get this pad very wet. So I dipped it in, and I'm going to squeeze it out to get rid of any excess that's in there, because all I want is just a really damp pad, just to really lightly put a very, very fine finish on, put a very fine amount of finish onto the surface. Not much at all. Another thing you can do is you can squeeze it into the back of the pad, and that kind of acts like a reserve. So as you're going, you can kind of get a little squeeze and get some more finish to the front. A little bit, just a corner in. There's a little bit on the pad here. I'm going to squeeze it into the pad so it stays in the back of it. And I can go back to applying the finish. So this finish is really thin. This will probably be dry to the touch in about, I don't know, less than a half hour. I'll still let it sit for a few hours, but it won't be collecting any dust or anything that's settling on it because it'll be dry so quickly. And dry to the touch at least, so nothing will stick to it. Which is why this thin coat really works so well. You don't have to worry about dust nibs as much getting into this finish at this stage because it's only wet for so short of a time. Alright, so that's it for the finish. Now the last thing I'll do is I'll let this sit and dry, and in a couple weeks, the longer the better, but at least 1 week, I'll let it sit so it's fully cured, and then I'll come back and I'll sand it really lightly with 1000 grit sandpaper just to knock down any of the last little bits of nibs and just smooth everything out. So now that sanding is done really lightly, not much pressure at all, just enough to remove any little lumps or defects in the finish and give a nice, really, really fine glass smooth finish, so when you touch it, you don't feel anything except for smoothness. So this whole process of finishing is really it's a really tactile process. You're using your hands a lot to touch the wood, to feel it, to actually be able to feel all the imperfections in the wood. And that's the entire process through pre-finishing and finishing. You see me as I'm going through it, I'm touching the wood, making sure I'm feeling everything to make sure everything is nice and smooth, because your fingertips are really, really sensitive and they can feel all that imperfection. So that's about it for this one. Thank you as always for watching. If you have a future Ask Matt topic suggestion, please feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to do an Ask Matt about pretty much whatever you want. So thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments about my finishing process here or anything here in my shop, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I appreciate those, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.